Well, I want to welcome our panelists here. Trish D'Antonio, the Executive Director of the National Center to Reframe Aging. Marcus Escobedo, the Vice President of Communications at the John A. Hartford Foundation. And Joon Bang, Chief Executive Officer of Iona. Can we get a round of applause? You want me to hit tape? So ageism is something that I care deeply about. I made a film about my mom who, was the victim of essentially of ageism and learned a lot as a younger person of how pernicious ageism is, how it is everywhere in our society, and how it's ingrained in us. But as you know, as we come into this new election cycle, things seem to have ramped up just a bit in terms of the way that we talk about older people, how we may be indirectly or directly ageist. And the folks at NCOA put together a short video that I want to play now that just gives you an idea of what's going on every day in the media and how we're portraying older people, both in politics and in our own communities. So let's play that video. And as somebody who is in the media, as a filmmaker, as a former journalist, I'm big on the phrase, when you control the media, you control the mind. And there are so many people who are sitting down every day, reading stories, watching the TV, and getting these signals about what it means to be old, whether they're true or not. But it's important to know that, ageism isn't just a them problem. It's not just a media problem. All of us, everyone in this room has a little bit of ageism ingrained in them because of the narratives that we, have come to know in this country. So in this session, it's really important that we sort of challenge, what you think, how you might be perpetuating ageism, but also give us the power that we can say, call it out when we see it, or at least reframe the way that we think about growing up and what it means to age. So in that spirit, I wanted to flip this sort of conversation on its head, not to say we're not ageist, but actually to dig in and say how are we ageist? So I want to go down the panel here and have us all maybe admit in recent memory how we might have been ageist, and I will model. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was calling Medicare on behalf of my mom to try and figure out the whole Medicare situation, which is as we know. I was on the phone with the guy, and he's like, well, all your mom has to do is go on this website and do this and do this and do this. And I was like, and I just got so frustrated, and I was like, my mom's old, she doesn't understand websites, And I realized, in that moment, yes, I was trying to make a point that there are technological barriers to entry here, but also that I was confirming maybe what he already thought about older people. Of course, there are older people who know their way around the internet, but in my anger and in my angst, I was just doubling down. So that is my honest thing, and I recognized it in the moment. Joon?
Can I go last?
Okay, Marcus.
Sure, Sian-Pierre. I'll share a similar story, at least related to my parents. My father is 86, my mother is 80, and over the last year, he's been experiencing more health issues. He's become more frail. He's had issues with his medications, with his doctor's appointments. I'll be on the phone with them trying to help as a long-distance caregiver. I was talking to my mom recently and was asking her, how's my dad doing? What are his medications like? How's he responding to them? How's he feeling today? All of a sudden I hear, mijo, I'm doing okay, I'm all right, I'm doing this. And he starts telling me, and I realize, oh, he's on speakerphone. And then I realize, oh, why am I asking my mom these questions instead of my dad? And is that something of me thinking over this last year, he's becoming more frail, less capable, less able, and here I am potentially being ageist in my response and not just talking to him about what matters. So now I will give myself some slack because if you know my mom, she is the boss of all of us, and so all of us checking in with her is the right thing to do, so, but that's my example of ageism.
Thank you for being honest, Marcus. We appreciate it. Trish?
So this is sort of a coupled piece, but this was probably 15 years ago. But I think it's important for all of us because it's a professional example. I had the most awesome slide of a tsunami that was talking about aging that moved while I presented. And I thought this was great. And the other thing that I realized as I started to learn more about the principles and how to work with reframing aging is everything I wrote about older people as other. They, them, they need this, they need that, as if I wasn't part of the aging, I wasn't aging, right? I wasn't part of this. And so I often think of it, I'm glad that we're at a version of PowerPoint that I can't even find the slide now, so it's just, but I gave presentations on aging and I would talk about it and think that this was the best thing I could do to get people to understand it. So I think that's really important to, remember that it's important when we're speaking in front of all, in front of all of our colleagues, making sure that we adopt some of those principles.
Yeah, totally. And Joon?
I'm tempted to take Trish's answer because I started in the aging services about 10 years ago, and I've had to confront all my life as part of an organization that serves older adults in the district, the idea of the others. And when you begin to serve older adults within the community, you recognize, you see yourself in so many of the people that you actually serve. And so I think that's both a gift, but also an opportunity for us to wrestle with, the biases that we hold on a regular basis.
And I'll be going around later making you all confess to me about how, don't worry, it will come to you. But Trish, at the National Center for Reframing Aging, I'm curious, about the research that you've done and how reframing works in the everyday.
Sure. So I wish I had an hour to explain this to you. I have 5 minutes. So here's something that I think we should all consider. One thing I think in the research that we learned is those of us working in aging, kind of going back to my silver tsunami example where I thought I was doing really well, we thought we were communicating in a way that was supporting the policies that we wanted to see, how people should think about aging. When really what we learned in our research was we were driving people toward non-productive thinking about aging, right? So what's really the activity that we try to work with through the National Center to Reframe Aging, through our education, through our technical assistance, through the work that when we're here presenting, is to be able to get people to model the language that drives us toward the productive thinking about aging. And there's three strategies that we want to advance in that communications. So one is to remember that what surrounds us shapes us, right? We hear that, we recognize that, we can communicate that in many ways. Another way to think about that is that we all have a collective responsibility when we're talking about our communities, right? We're all part of our communities. And then the third strategy to advance is that ageism is a problem that can be solved, right? We, in American culture, we have solved many pernicious problems, and we can solve this problem as well. The tough part is it's really easy to draw the traps or the negative and unproductive thoughts about aging. They're sitting right here ready to come out of my mouth, right? And I really have to check myself, and we all have to check ourselves as we're communicating. These three strategies to advance, they're a little bit more deeply seated, and we have to practice. And that's why when we talk about this, we say it's a long-term culture change, right? It's going to take us 10 to 20 years to really get this into our culture and get people to understand why we talk about aging the way we do. And people will model our language. That's the important piece to recognize. People will model what we say and how we talk about aging. So it's so important for us to learn and adapt and adopt these communication strategies. So we're not going to tell you this is the phrase that pays. What we are going to say is, think about this when you want to show how older people are part of our community. We're all part of the community, and policies that support us as we age benefit us all.
That's a great answer. And I'm going to ask you another question, though. I'm curious, like, how, at Reframing Aging, what is the multi-pronged approach to that, right? I mean, is it older folks that are, taking this on? Is it NCOA and organizations that deal with aging who are sort of reframing it in the way that they communicate? How does an 8-year-old that is, at home, how are we modeling it for them?
So I think we're in our infancy, right? How many of you, before you walked in the door, would say, I understand the principles to reframe aging? Just trying to get, like, on a 1 to 5, 5 being, I am Trish, give me the microphone. I can do this for you. All right, how about a 3? Like, I've heard of it, but I'm not so sure. And how about a 1? Like, what is this woman doing up on this? And it's okay, because you know what? That's what I mean. We're in our infancy in disseminating this work and starting to understand how we can apply it. And the first place we know we need to apply it is within the aging network, right? Because in our research, we learned we're the ones who are perpetuating this non-productive thought about aging. When we talk about death, decline, and disability, rather than recognizing how we're so much more different as we age, our heterogeneity as we age, right? So we're starting in the aging network, and we're starting to move beyond that. So the 10 aging organizations that I am too nervous to mention all of them because I'm going to forget one of them, but you can go on our website, and all of them are there. NCOA is included. We are all working within our communities of interest, with our memberships, with our partners, to start to have this conversation. And then we're modeling the language so that our partners start to pick that up as well. So I think that's one place to be really thinking about it. When we talk about ageism, and I can get to this, or if you want to go, when we think about the intergenerational programs that we participate in, we know through research that that's one of the best ways, through education and engagement, where we see older people and younger people working together in programs. There's research from CoGenerate that talks about how older people and younger people do want to work together, right? Often there's this thought that people don't want to work with one another, but they do. And then the other thing I would say is that these programs are usually low cost. It doesn't cost much to get people in a room together to engage in a project together. Whether it's learning how to crochet, learning about history and sharing that, there are so many different ways that we can do that. And it really could be a community-based program and community interest. So those are things that are low cost for us to start to understand and dispel those misunderstandings about aging. And remember, ageism is life course. Right? So we hear ageism for younger people just as much as we hear it for older people. While our project is focused on older people, we do hear it across the life course. And just think about it. I'm sure if you sat and thought about it for a couple minutes, you'd remember something that you heard about. Maybe a 21-year-old who has access to top secret information, and how could that possibly happen? Or a 25-year-old can't be running a program because she's not old enough yet. Things like that.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I think the modeling from us first is really important, and I think that there has been success around that. I mean, if you look around at the care movement, for example, and I care a lot about narratives, obviously, and storytelling, and caregiving has really sort of seeped into pop culture and the importance of it. And to think if we are able to model that you are aging from your first breath, and how do we, seep that into film and TV to show people in their lived reality, then that 8-year-old is seeing that television show and starting to learn.
Yes.
So you're right, it does come from us, and it can happen. Joon, question. So your organization, it serves older adults directly, and I'm curious, what impact does ageism have on your ability to achieve your mission, and how are you working to change that every day on the ground with the people you serve?
Yeah. So Trish mentioned something about culture and language. One of the things that we wrestle with at Iona is our approach to serving the older population, both in our service as well as our language. There's research that indicates that if there's reverence within a community for the aging process, the health outcomes for that community will look very different from the community that that labels or approaches older adults in a different way. So to give you an example, communities like indigenous communities that use terms like elders versus the elderly will have a significant variance in terms of health outcomes of older adults in their communities. And we see the parallel between elders and elderly in the way in which policies as well as funding occurs within the aging system. So for example, if we take the approach of reverence and respect and we look at the older people in our community as elders, there is more of a likelihood that we would approach our work with a just versus an unjust lens, versus if it's looking at people in a community that are elderly. And to that, we might attribute more of a charity aspect to how we serve. To give you an example, if you look at the District of Columbia, it's shaped like a diamond. The life expectancy between someone who ages in Northwest DC versus Southeast DC is 15 years. So imagine that. So the distance between Northwest and Southeast is about 7 miles. So the farther you travel down towards Southeast DC, you're expected to live 15 years less than your neighbors who are aging in Northwest DC. And so one of the things that we did as an organization was we developed the adult day health center in Southeast DC. Now, if DC were a state, it would have the highest prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia in all 50 states, or if we were a state, it would be 51. But services in Southeast DC do not exist in terms of providing dementia care services and help for caregivers in Southeast DC. And so for us, we look at our work and our services to the older adult population as one of which is just for our society, as opposed to one that is based on charity. And so that's one of the things that we look at internally and we wrestle with within our staff to say, the people we serve, the services we provide is based on equity and access, access to equity and just as opposed to just charity work and to help someone.
Wow, 15 years.
Yeah.
That's significant.
It's intense, yeah.
I'm curious, in this space, when we talk about culture being a part of it, right? Like reverence in some cultures for older adults, I mean, that's built into the culture. How do you think about it as an organization, being sensitive to the cultures that you're serving so that, it's not, you're not sort of mandating what their culture should be like, if you will, but sort of fostering instead?
Right. So that's such a great question because I think that shows up so much in the policies in the country. And so what we try to do to be intentional is we bring along the people within the community to advise us. So all of our programs have community advisory groups or boards to advise us on whether we are making the right choices, whether we are listening to the people we serve, and also we've provided the system of feedback so that we're learning with the people we serve as we provide our services.
That's great. Marcus, how do you see the intersection of ageism and racism in particular, but maybe any of the other isms at play when it comes to inequities in healthcare and other sectors of society?
Sure. I think there's some parallels here, Joon, with what you were talking about in terms of life expectancy, and there's such negative health impacts that come from ageism. We're talking years of life. Becca Levy, terrific researcher at Yale University, has studies out showing that negative internalized ageism can take 7 years off of your life. These are serious consequences here. You can think about the risk for cardiovascular disease and dementia are also associated with those negative internalized ageist views. So we have a real problem here in healthcare because it gets translated, particularly that individualized frame that we might have based on our culture. So what do we see? We see under-treatment and over-treatment in healthcare, with under-treatment really being something people grasp, right? So our president tells a story about Grandpa Frank and her family who, she saw him and he was not moving around. He loved to be outside and his leg was bothering him. She asked him, what's wrong? He said, oh, I went to the doctor. He says, you're getting old. He said, oh, well, she said, well, let's check that out. Got him back, got the x-ray. No, he has a fracture. Got care for that, and then suddenly he's back to doing what matters to him out in the yard. That's ageism manifesting in healthcare in clinical treatment decisions based on blind spots from this clinician that's been infused with these ageist beliefs over time. Similarly, with racism and other forms of discrimination, we know the negative outcomes from that. They're serious, and that's across the lifespan. We know the horrendous rates of maternal mortality among Black women in this country, and that discrimination doesn't stop suddenly when you turn 65, right? So we have to, in the aging services world, and think about that impact of continued discrimination as we get into later life. There's also great work going on in the social sciences around the cumulative effects of discrimination in all forms. Think about LGBTQ plus discrimination, ableism, all kinds of discrimination which are harmful to our health. They intersect, they overlap, and they potentially have cumulative effects. You think about what's happening in a 40-year-old's life and whether they have access to healthy foods and access to quality health care. What's that going to mean 30 years down the road, right? So that ageism interplays. But I want to shift a little bit to the solutions, right? Because like Joon was saying, I think there's that interplay of your individual ageist views, those blind spots that a clinician or other provider might have, but how can we counter that? And I think it's with programs, services, structures, that's what surrounds us, shapes us, helps to mitigate those negative impacts from ageism and other forms of discrimination. So our foundation is behind something called the Age-Friendly Health Systems Movement. Has anyone heard of that here? Yay, okay, well, great. So this is, 3,900 hospitals, practices, nursing homes out there that have adopted a framework that helps focus on the key principles of good care for older adults. It's called the 4 M's, what matters to you as an older adult, your medications, your mind, and your mobility. And what we found is that when providers have this framework and a structured process to follow, that mitigates against the potential assumptions and biases that a clinician might have, dismissing that fracture and instead doing the screens for mobility that are going to help identify what's really going on and then address it. Similarly, in that program, recognizing the overlap of discrimination and racism, they build in structured steps to look at data to make sure that you don't have blind spots around particular demographic groups that may be experiencing poor health outcomes from any variety of reasons. And so that is a way to structurally get around some of these negative harms that come from impact in healthcare, but I think it's an example for any sector that's working out there.
Mm-hmm. And to continue the vibe of action, when I'm listening to you, it's like 7 years, 5 years, we're talking about doctors, we're talking about community. This is an internalization of people feeling old, feeling all of these things that are sort of thrust upon people, and that everybody in this room has the ability to shift that, right, in your everyday action. This is the way that you're speaking about people. This is the way that you're thinking about people. This is, the way that you're assuming things about folks, and not to sort of say you're bad, but, just sort of to acknowledge that, like, there are people on the other side of that who we are harming, whether we see it directly in the moment or not. It is cumulative for these folks and these communities. And as I always said with the film rollout, was like, it is like the one, ageism is the one ism that we will all experience, It's like the one thing that ties us all together if we're lucky enough to get older and old. We're all going to experience it, but we don't have to. We can all take action to make sure that doesn't happen. let's talk policy, which is something that like I don't really follow enough. I sort of live my real life, but I'm wondering, I'm wondering what we can do to sort of shift the ageist assumptions that are baked into so many of the public programs, and what are those assumptions exactly for somebody like me who, again, is on the ground. Trish, we'll start with you.
So I guess there's a couple of things, and as you say that you're living your normal life, my normal life as a vice president of policy is
great. That's why we got you here, Trish.
My family, my friends, and even my colleagues say, "Oh my gosh, it only took her 2 minutes to get this connected to a policy issue." So it's just kind of funny to hear the different conversations, but I think some of the things that we talk about as far as traps to avoid are definitely some of the things that we know are informing policy, right? So there's a trap of communication called individualism. If you only exercised and dieted, you would not have this problem with diabetes and cardiovascular disease in your 50s. So if you exercised and dieted all your life, you wouldn't have this problem. Well, we're not saying that we don't have personal responsibility, but what does that not recognize? So I'll give you the Southeast DC example, and I used to work for the DC Department of Health. There were no, 5 years ago, there were no grocery stores like that we could go to in Southeast DC. You'd have to take a bus or a metro to get to a regular grocery store that we may all be used to going to. There were no sit-down restaurants with tablecloths in Southeast DC. So there's fast food. And what do you say to somebody who's running between 3 jobs because they're trying to make sure that they have food on the table for their kids? So there's what surrounds us, shapes us, really does make a difference. Another example is if you had only started saving for retirement when you were 22 years old, you would not be in this problem that you couldn't retire right now. What doesn't that consider? Is everybody at 22 years old in a position to start putting money away for retirement? Are we thinking about somebody who might be a single mother who has 3 children and has other activities that they need to go along with to make sure that their children are taken care of? And so things like that are baked into policy when we start conversations with policymakers with the fatalistic numbers or the fatalistic, by 2030. First of all, I always find this like a boring statement for any of us who work in aging to start with. Is by 2030, the percentage population that'll be over the age of 65. We all know that, right? Why are we starting with that, right? We want to start with the solution, right? In our community, if we have the resources to be able to educate people and teach people about the importance of saving for retirement and how you can save for retirement with certain opportunities, right? Certain policies that we can get passed. Then you could start to think about how we communicate that. The last thing that I would mention, and I just lost my train of thought, and I don't want to go back to my notes. The last thing that I would mention here is that when we lead with a solution, we can get somebody to start thinking. We get a policymaker to start thinking like, I want to be part of this, right? So think about the systemic solution rather than leading with the statistics. And trust me, with policy people, we're all taught you have to make it a crisis, you have to teach everybody right away. If this is a problem, you got to do this right away. But what I've seen is if you can get people to start thinking about that solution, like caregiving, and recognizing how family caregiving policies benefit us all, right? Family caregiving policies, good policies there, benefit maybe an older person that we are caring for, benefit us who are sandwiched in between, benefit younger people, teenagers who are part of a caregiving nation, right? We forget about that. But that's important to think about. If we have good family policy, family caregiving policy, it benefits us all. And I think that's something that we have to work into this. So when we think about our policies and how we communicate them, when we start with the solution, and then go to the statistics like in sentence 3 or paragraph 3 in our briefing document, we usually can get a better conversation with policymakers.
Share the vision.
Yes, get people to a shared vision.
Anybody else want to answer this question? Yes?
I'll piggyback because, and I should have said this, as we try to spread our work in the clinical setting to be, have age-friendly healthcare, a lot of that is giving people the tools to communicate effectively, as we're talking about. So use the tools and resources from the National Center to Reframe Aging, reframeaging.org, reframingaging.org, and use their resources, which hit on these important points that Trish is making around try to avoid the traps of fatalism, as you're suggesting here, where you're presenting this huge problem like that silver tsunami that we're not going to talk about, or individualism, as you mentioned, or what the other one, otherism, right? Having people not recognize or see themselves as aging. So in addition, I was going to say, start with a solution. The other one I would say that fits into this is avoid at all costs the zero-sum mindset. I was just reading an article the other day that was, here's the dollars that the United States spends per Medicare beneficiary versus kids, versus. I was like, oh, this does not help any of us by having that kind of mindset. So thinking about how all of us together can take a different view, a different frame on that pie that we're trying to carve up, that it's actually probably not what we think it is if we have a different perspective. The caregiving world, I think, gives us some examples of that working, where we can bring people together. You have people who are taking care of children who are also taking care of their parents. And suddenly when you bring that all together to a policymaker, you open up a whole realm of possibilities. So that's where I would add in on the policy front.
Go ahead. So when I was growing up, in our school there was a Norman Rockwell painting, The Golden Rule, and there's this inscription: "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." And that's no different with policies that affect the older population too. I think what has been so enlightening for me is when we invite elected officials to come and tour our center to meet the people we serve, they begin to see things differently. And so, for example, when you look at all 50 states and the Medicaid application process, it's a monster. For some states, in order to enroll in Medicaid, you have to fill out this 50-page to 100-page document that takes years of your life, right, in a sense. But if you invite the elected officials to come and see the people you serve and give them an opportunity to imagine what it would be like in their shoes, the people we serve, that's been effective for us. When we're able to personalize and help legislators and elected officials see that their policies affect the people that are breathing and living just like every one of us.
It took me watching my mom become invisible in front of my eyes for me to care. For me to realize it was happening, I think is probably the more proper way to say it. It was an awakening for me that not only in her job was she not sort of revered, if you will, or visible, but then it seemed to cascade after that, on online web applications, at every turn, the culture was erasing her. And I really tried to make that point in my film, or at least have that come across. And so the question I have is, how do we get the younger generation to care? And after the film was out, so many people were like, "Oh my God, my mom too. Oh my God, my mom too." And finally, this film sort of gave people a platform to sort of advocate on behalf of themselves and their parents. But if they're not in that stage that I was of seeing it happen, what turns the light on? Marcus?
Oh.
Turn the light on.
Turn the light on. Well, I'm an optimist, right? So I think of this conversation we're having right now around ageism, and you showed all the clips, and terrible, horrible, just makes my, right?
I know.
Yeah, but I think it's raised the concept of ageism in daily conversation to a level we haven't seen before, and I take hope from that. I think about the 5.4 million children under the age of 18 who are family caregivers, taking care of an adult or their parent, their grandparent who's dealing with chronic conditions or need assistance. They're living that light bulb moment on a daily basis. You combine that with what we're seeing in maybe not all of media, but in certain areas of popular culture and entertainment where you have films that are representing older adults in much more complete ways than we have ever before. So I think over time, we're gonna actually see some change naturally happen, and then the rest of it is up to us to accelerate that, to make it happen more quickly. It's about our own communications, how we talk, using the reframing aging principles in all of our interactions as we're talking about aging. And I think that will result in younger folks getting that aha moment and joining in.
But I think one thing, and Marcus, you really hit the nail on the head. But one of the things that we have to think about is people will model our language. People will hear what we say as experts in our field, as experts in our community, as knowledgeable members of the community, and people will model that language. And it's so important for us to think about that and where we can incorporate that in our work every day. The other piece, knowledge and sharing that knowledge with others, right? So we have to understand that most of our colleagues, most of our partners that we work with back at home, most of our families do not wake up in the morning and say, I want to be ageist, right? So we don't want to point to somebody and say, you're ageist, right? What you want to do is bring people along, continue to model the language, continue to help people understand why this is important. When we see a film or we read an article that's well framed, share it, right? It's real easy for us to go to the negative right away, and it's really a practice that we have to all start to engage in to show the productive pieces. And so often, particularly in the media, in print, or in the newspaper articles, we'll see the clickbait. So the headline will be written in a way that we would not want to see it written. But if you read the story, sometimes the person who wrote the story understands how to write that well-framed message, and we have to call that out. And we have to get excited about things like that and share that with people when we see something that is well framed and congratulate them, right? So that's part of what I think we really need to be able to do. When we see a movie, we have to share that with people. Like, this is a really great example of how realistically older people live. It's not denying that we may have chronic conditions. It's not denying that we may need assistive devices. In fact, we should talk about why it's so important that using assistive devices helps us to be able to participate in community, right? So things like that we have to call out and show people the example.
Yeah, Trish, I think that's a really great point. The way, it's important to note sort of the irresponsibility of the media, I think, in this moment. Mostly because everything is gamed, particularly on social media, to make the user feel something, right? Make me angry, make me happy, don't make me just like make me want to click. And that's irresponsible to put a headline, for example, that makes me want to click, particularly if the content of the article actually isn't so, so inflammatory. And these editors, et cetera, need to realize that. And so I say that all to say that click those articles, read them, and then comment about the irresponsibility of it. That's really, really important because we are working with a legion of folks who don't see the harm in what they're doing, and are just basically gaming the system for a click. And it's wrong because it's having such a deleterious effect on our community and our culture.
Right. And our subconscious, it's really impacting our implicit and our subconscious bias.
Exactly.
Right? That's what it's activating. And we want to continue to activate the productive thinking that, remember, is buried deep down. For even those of us who work in aging, it's harder to access that.
Okay, we're going to end on a lightning round question, which seems to be a trend here. I thought we were going to be the unique ones with the lightning round, but I'm wondering, what is the most impactful step each of us here today can take to combat ageism? And perhaps this is like, the easiest thing you can do, or a challenge, I don't care. But you know, what is one thing everybody can walk out of this room and do in their everyday to make a change? We'll start with you, Joon.
I feel like if I said anything, I'd be preaching to the choir a little bit, because I know that there's so many people who are in the field of aging. One thing that I have learned is that the more we spend time with people who are not in aging services and educate them and bring them along in the experiences of the people we serve and the programs we provide, light bulbs begin to click on for them. And I feel that that's so important. And that's our responsibility as practitioners in aging services as well. So,
first, I'm going to say thank you to all of you for what you do to help support all of us as we age. And then I'll end on that as my recommendation for all of you. What I did there was I used sort of the power of pronouns. We are all aging, right? And that simple shift, and I do this as I'm editing all of our copy, instead of those older adults over there that we're serving so well in our communities, no, this is about supporting all of us as we get older. And if you do that, it just leads to all of those other avoiding all of those other traps that Trish was mentioning. It counters individualism, it counters fatalism. So start with shifting your pronouns to talking about we are all aging.
So I'll give you another practical example. We were at booth 116 over the course of the meeting, and we had different case studies that were out that you could read about how people were reframing aging in their communities and in the work that they do. On the other side, we had what we call our quick start guide, where it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about with reframing aging, but I want to be able to reframe some of my communications. So the quick start guide, you can actually look and it'll say, rather than saying this, try this. So I would challenge you, if you didn't pick up one of those, to either go to our website, reframingaging.org, or go back over. I do know that we have some paper on the table, unless the tables have already been taken down. But you want to start with the quick start guide. Pick one thing and commit for a month. Just 1 month. You don't have to commit for all year. Just commit for 1 month that you will adopt one of those principles when you are working on a document that you're writing. Maybe you're updating a website. Maybe you have to respond to a message that you receive from someone in the community. Pick one thing and commit to it for 1 month, and see how that goes, and then come back to us and we'll talk more about what you can commit to the next one.
I love that, and I'll just end on what sort of modeling what my mom does. My mom's probably friends with a couple people in this room who she's never met because she lives on social media and loves it. But she is always commenting on, particularly on LinkedIn, for like job applications. If they're looking for like young, vibrant, you know, exciting new talent or whatever, she's sort of saying, oh, really? Like, you know, commenting underneath and saying, maybe there's a reframe here. You know, perhaps we don't need to use the word young. Perhaps we don't need to use the word new and vibrant. And I'm really, because I'll just go through LinkedIn and I'm like, oh my God, my mom's commenting on these people. But I really appreciate it, because it is sort of the aha moment that somebody on the other end might need to understand sort of the harm that they're creating. So you can do that in your everyday. Anyway, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here at the conference. And enjoy.